And we begin today's program in Hungary, where Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is attending the 6th meeting of the heads of government of China, Central and Eastern European countries. The meeting in Hungary coincides with the 5th anniversary of the establishment of China's cooperation with the 16 CEE countries. These nations have warmly welcomed the China-proposed Belt and Road Initiative. Over the years, cooperation between China and the CEE countries has achieved, some say, substantial progress in connectivity, trade, e-commerce, and also cultural exchanges. Take a look.
The first 16+1 summit was held in Warsaw, Poland in 2012. At the event, the Chinese premier announced a comprehensive initiative on cooperation with 16 Central and Eastern European countries entitled China's 12 Measures for Promoting Friendly Cooperation with Central and Eastern European Countries, which is the framework document for the 16+1 format. At the 2013 Bucharest summit in Romania, the group agreed to provide more support to small and medium-sized enterprises and offer more room to play an active role in bilateral trade. China reached an agreement with Hungary and Serbia to jointly build a railway between the latter two countries. During the 2014 Belgrade summit in Serbia, China, Serbia, Hungary and Macedonia agreed to build an express line which links the Greek port of Piraeus in the south and the Hungarian capital of Budapest in the north. At the 2015 Suzhou summit in China, participants stated their readiness to formulate the medium-term agenda for cooperation between China and CEEC, taking the China-EU 2020 Strategic Agenda for Cooperation as the guideline document for China-EU relations. On November 5, 2016, the 5th Summit of China and CEEC was held in the Latvian capital of Riga. Baltic Sea countries, including Latvia, expressed their hope to join the Belt and Road Initiative because the region is an important logistics hub. CEE nations, located in a geographic linkage between China and Europe, are of vital importance for China to enhance its relations with Europe as a whole. The economies of CEE countries, complementary to China's economy, have witnessed an increasing number of their products being exported to China.
China and CEE countries are located at the two ends of Eurasia. Although being far from each other geographically, we can cooperate under the platform of the China-CEEC summit. That indicates that globalization has many forms. The trans-regional cooperation between China and CEE countries is one of the examples. China and CEE countries have great complementarity, which makes their cooperation open and fair.
And for more on Chinese Premier Li Keqiang visit to CEE, the Central and Eastern European countries, we are joined in our Beijing studio, Zhang Jianping, who is the Director General of the Center for Regional Cooperation with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Welcome, sir, to our program. In Budapest, we have Viktor Eszterhai, who is a senior researcher of Pallas Athene Geopolitical Foundation. Welcome. First time to our program. Big welcome to you. In Brussels, we're also joined by Pieter Cleppe, head of the Brussels office of Open Europe. Welcome as well. Let me begin with you, Mr. Eszterhai. We understand, according to a latest report done by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, there is an urgent need among the Central and Eastern European countries for infrastructure building and the search for new growth model. What does that mean to your economy and also your cooperation with China?
So, to talk of the opportunities between Hungary and China is really a complex question because, first of all, Hungary is part of the European Union, so it's not just about Hungary to talk about, but there is a wider picture about these questions. However, to see the real opportunities for Hungary, we have to know that Hungary at the moment is part of the semi-periphery status and periphery of the European Union, part of the Central Eastern region. And for us, we see the opportunity to work together with China as a possibility to diversify our economic relations. So the end of 2010, the Hungarian government just launched a new foreign policy concept, which is called the Eastern Opening, in order to diversify our relationship. Why is it so important? It's very important because 80% of our trade and most of the FDI coming to Hungary is very much connected to West Europe. So there is a big need in Hungary in order to diversify these relationships.
I see. Mr. Cleppe, though, you look at these Central and Eastern European countries, they are developing, but they are also coming into the so-called middle-income trap. While their technological innovation is improving, the wages are also going up, and therefore people wonder how much competitiveness really is there for these countries to cooperate with the other parts of the world. Mr. Cleppe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's true to a certain extent. Of course, like for example, Romania is growing 8% this year, so some of these countries are really still growing quite strongly, but indeed they also have a bit of reform fatigue. So the big shock therapy reforms were implemented in the 90s, but for example, Hungary has actually lost on the ranking of competitiveness in the last 20 years. And there's some other examples of that. So indeed, of course, Chinese investment is not necessarily going to be the #1 solution to that. The #1 solution is at home. These countries need to continue liberalization and, and make their country more competitive. But of course, it's good to have more investment also from China, I think.
But the liberalization and the reforms and the privatization, Mr. Eszterhai, has been quite a debate in the Central and Eastern European countries. I mean, some countries would like to push forward still. Other countries feel they've already reached a certain degree. As Mr. Cleppe said, that there's also the kind of fatigue phenomenon. What is going on inside your country? And as a result, what would that mean for investment?
There is a big debate about Hungary. That is our direction is good or not. So after we transform our political and economic system in 1989, there was a clear model to follow, and it was the Western model, mostly focusing on democratization and market liberalization and privatization. However, as a result of this, we could really transform our political and economic system, but we could not reach those kind of results we originally wanted to have. So there is a growing skepticism in Hungary that is the only possible way for development. So in this region also quite clear that we have to find our own way of development, and that is where China comes into the pictures, because we see that it is possible to do this kind of development in its own way, or in a different way at least.
So, Mr. Zhang here in Beijing, it's kind of interesting that these countries, CEE countries, not only looking at China as the investor, but also as whether it's an alternative for development models that they can follow, or at least draw experiences from. But do you think those kind of comparisons are going to be appropriate when it comes to China and the Central and Eastern European countries?
Yeah, I think that CEE countries, most of them belonging to small countries, as well as
small economies.
Small economies, small populations. Also, it's located in the center of European, between EU and Russia. So in this regard, due to the past history, you will find that for those CEE countries, it's not easy for them, to have their very obvious characteristics, characterized, economic development model, especially, EU country belonging to developing economies.
That's right.
So in this case, I'm afraid that CEE countries need to learn, some of experiences from Chinese side, because we already have our so-called Chinese characterized economic model. especially today we are chasing a new economic, new industries, new driving force, new business models. In this regard, I'm afraid that CE countries also need to explore what type of business model and industries would be better for them.
Well, when China is chasing for a new, different ways of development, what would that mean for the CEE countries? Mr. Eszterhai, some say probably more competition with China rather than cooperation or learning from the Chinese model.
Of course, that's a really nice question and really hard to answer. I think competition is good. There is a growing tendency within the European Union that we should build walls and try to avoid the competition of the Chinese companies. So just to think about the new regulations about investment introduced in Germany this summer, it is clear that there are some skeptical voices within the European Union that we try to avoid these competitions, partly because they say it's not fair, and we should try to build some walls and at least to renegotiate our trade relations. However, in the Central Eastern European countries, we see that what is the real solution is to have more competition. But of course, in order to be successful, we need clear strategy as well. Currently, we don't really see the support from the western part of the European Union in order to create this new common strategy.
Okay.
So it is not enough just to talk about common cooperation, but we really need that in order to be able to compete with China, because that can lead to a better future and better economic gains.
I see. Mr. Cleppe, you have heard from your Eastern European colleague suggesting that the EU has not been very much of support for like search of a new development model for these economies, which is also in urgent need for development.
Well, of course, the EU has been fundamentally a great thing, I think, for Central and Eastern Europe. We should not forget that it has helped to stabilize these countries. That was not a given. They came out of the Soviet dictatorship periods. But I wanted to respond to some of the ideas that were floated, that there would be somehow a Chinese economic model. I mean, I think the reason why China has developed in the last 30 years is precisely because it has opened up, because it has engaged with the world, because it has liberalized, because it has left room for private initiative, and that's great. And I do think that to the extent that China will go further on that path, it will further grow. And we should also not present it as if the West, Western Europe, the United States, are perfect examples of free market capitalism. I mean, the state has a massive role. The taxes are about, or sort of around half of GDP. So Western Europe and the United States can actually go a lot further in liberalization themselves.
And therefore, it leads to the Eastern and Central European countries to decide on their own fate. Having said that, though, let me ask you about this, Mr. Eszterhai. You know, the so-called BRIC industry is blossoming in the Central and Eastern European countries, but only in very limited areas. For example, the areas near some of the most important capital cities, but not necessarily all over the countries and the economies. So people wonder, where is the growth model? Where is the growing driving force? Mr. Eszterhai, what do you think?
I don't really believe that we have a special economic model. As I previously mentioned, we are part of the European Union. So I see the solution now to renegotiate the economic model within the European Union, but with that remark that probably the Central Eastern European Union has some new ideas or different way of thinking about that. So I don't believe that we have an independent model, but what I believe that we have to find some new solutions together. So that can be a different case, because previously there was just one model we should follow in the region, and probably, and according to my view, this has already changed. The question could be for us that is it possible to be integrated also in the Chinese value chain? That's a really hard question. That could be a breakout for the regional economies. So there is some ideal that in order to be part also not just the Western European value chain, but also the Chinese value chain, that could be provide a breakout, a very special development moment for the region.
Okay, Mr. Zhang. China talk about the Belt and Road Initiative. Many of the Central and Eastern European countries are participants in, at least they showed up at the Belt and Road Summit earlier this year. So, Mr. Zhang, is that going to be the driving initiative between China and the Central and European countries? Is it enough?
Yes, of course. Today, actually, 16+1 already becomes a very important platform, cooperation platform for the Belt and Road Initiative. Or we can say that this is a part of BRI. In this regard, I think that just before, the friend from Hungary mentioned China's supply chain, EU's supply chain. Actually, BRI will make those CE countries have very good opportunities, involved in, new global supply chain and new regional production network and service sectors development.
I see. Mr. Cleppe, as a result of that, will the EU still remain as attractive as to these Central and Eastern European countries as before?
Yeah, I think so. I think the one thing does not exclude the other. That's the great thing about trade. It's not mutually exclusive. I mean, of course, the more trade, the merrier. And the one danger, of course, is that, I mean, this is a state-led initiative led by the Chinese state. So basically what the Chinese state wants, one of the purposes is to get rid of its dollar reserves, which is, of course, completely understandable because the dollar is not always that stable given the actions of the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Central Bank. But the risk is then that it starts investing to invest without necessarily looking at the merits of all the projects. So we have a risk of investment bubbles that then may lead to losses. So that's definitely a risk here, I think.
Mr. Zhang, you want to respond to that?
I think that between China and the CEE countries in the future, financial supporting, how to explore qualified capital support for not only infrastructure but also for those investments and other fields, including maybe new projects in the region. In this regard, from Chinese side, I'm very happy to see we already cooperated with ECE countries, established a so-called financial cooperation to support multilateral financial cooperation to support finance issues. Meanwhile, also we hope that in the future, a Silk Road Fund and AIIB, this type of new financial institutions also can provide enough capital.
But Mr. Zhang, you didn't respond to what Mr. Cleppe had just said. He was accusing that this is rather a state initiative, and it's all about the state, and it's about getting rid of the U.S. dollar reserves. So I guess it would be fair if you respond to that.
No. Actually, that from Chinese side, we have a very clear saying. The Belt and Road Initiative is not only belonging to Chinese side, it's already belonging to the a new global governance governance platform accepted by United Nations. Meanwhile, more than 74 countries and more than 20 international organizations already accepted this initiative. So that means BRI is not on behalf of China's strategy, actually on behalf of the new approaches for international regional cooperation.
Well, of course, all the things are in the details of whether these would work out and what is the best way to work out all of these possibilities is still a big question mark. We're looking forward to the discussions of those politicians. Thank you so much for now, the three of you, for joining us, Zhang Jianping, Viktor, Eszterhai, and Pieter Cleppe. Really appreciate it, gentlemen, for being with us.